The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
My baby dolls, we are back again. Another episode of Genesis. Again, it's March and it's still snowing out there. Opening days in another week, and I don't know, living up here in Boston. Hey, I don't even know if they're going to get the snow out of Fenway Park. It's that cold. And, we were supposed to get a lot more snow, but they pushed it south to New York and to Philly. And they got socked with the snow. But you know something? I'm going to tell you something right now. It is cold like I've never felt cold in March. It is that prevalent. And I don't know why winter waited this long, but spring training's almost done. We're ready for the 2018 season. And today, we got a recurring guest, and Paul Scimonelli is going to be here with his wonderful book, Roy Sievers, The Sweetest Right-Handed Swing in 1950s Baseball. And if you like classic baseball like I do, this is a book to get, folks, because, again, if Roy Sievers, if he was on the Dodgers, if he was on St. Louis, if he was on the Yankees, he would be known. And it was Casey Stengel who said that he had the sweetest swing in baseball. We'll get to Roy and we'll get to Paul in just a second. And as I break for station identification, hey, you're listening to me, Ian Kahanowitz, and I'm on Ralph Tycho's network, the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And let me tell you, folks, it's an honor to be on this network. We got a great lineup. We got programs with Peter Golenbach and Hal Bach. We got so much. We got San Francisco Giants baseball, New York baseball. We got Bill Cachedis out in Philadelphia doing Philadelphia baseball. We got Mark Littell and Mark Weiss doing the Mark in the midday. And something? Mark Littell's a good sport. He's the guy who gave up the home run to Chris Chambliss to send the Yankees into the World Series for the first time in 12 seasons back in 1976. And, so I'm getting his perspective of it and really, not really minding about it. I'm sure he thinks about it every day, but he's just a great sport. And we have a great network. I've had people on my show like Fritz Peterson from the New York Yankees. Brett Boone has been on my show. Perry Barber, who just won the Lifetime Achievements Award for women by Sabre. She's been umpiring now for 38 years in the independent leagues, and she was the first female to actually umpire a major league game in spring training back in 1985. And her favorite team, the New York Mets, invite her back every year. So she's been doing this now for 33 years. And I believe last year was the first time in spring training that an all-female umpire team actually called a game with the New York Mets, I think playing Pittsburgh down in Florida. She is just wonderful. I met her many times in this lifetime, and we took pictures last year at Fenway Park. And to have these folks on my show, along with all these great authors, what I try to deliver to you folks is education, things you never knew about, and things that are very important to baseball. And with that, hey, we got Paul Scimonelli back, and without any further ado, hey, Paul, what's going on?
Ian, you know how they say it, it's colder than a mother-in-law's kiss.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty cold, man. I don't know, my mother-in-law's not into kissing, so you know what, she usually makes the sign of the cross and smacks me in the head with a rolling pin.
The rolling pin.
The rolling pin, because they're rolling out the stuff to make the gnocchis,
Oh, my God. Absolutely. It's always either that or the broomstick. My grandmother had the broomstick.
My mother-in-law, when I had hair, she used to pull it, but now that I'm bald, so just take the rolling pin and look at me like the eyes with a devil. And there's always fresh flour on her. She's always cooking. My father-in-law, he doesn't even let the butchers dissect the cow. He buys the whole cow and dissects it himself.
Really? He breaks down the whole cow himself?
He breaks it down. You have 6 children, you have 7 grandchildren, and you have slews of nieces and nephews who always stop by.
Sure. It's always time.
So you know how that goes. Roy Sievers. Last time we got to speaking about the reserve clause and everything. Now let's concentrate a little bit about Roy. Now let me ask you this. One of the things about Roy Sievers he had to overcome a lot of professional setbacks. Let's talk about that, and before he gets some fame in the 1950s.
Well, Roy, of course, won the first Rookie of the Year award in 1949. And then in 1950, he slumped really bad. He got hit by the sophomore jinx, and he didn't have a good year. I mean, with 113 games, and he only batted 238, down from 306. So it was pretty bad, and he went from 16 home runs to 10. So his production wasn't, what it was, and a lot of people thought that maybe his front shoulder was flying open, and he was being fooled by the curveball. I think all the pitchers, found out about his weaknesses and weren't throwing him fastballs or anything, high anymore. They were throwing him all breaking stuff and sliders and changes and stuff like that. So in 50, he had a paltry season. In 51, it got even worse. And so finally, by about May or June, he was sent down to Beaumont, Texas, in the Triple-A League to get seasoned. He just wasn't hitting. So when he goes down in 1951, his coach tries to teach him how to lay out for a low line drive out in left field. And he obviously didn't do it properly, and he severely separated his shoulder. We're talking about the bone coming completely, out of the socket and the whole thing. So he was done in 51. That was August the 1st of 1951. So he's finished for that season. And then in 52, he goes to spring training, and Rogers Hornsby is the manager at that time. And they started him out at third base because, with the bad shoulder, he couldn't play outfield anymore, so they figured maybe third base would be a shorter throw. They start him at third base, and he tries to put some pop on the ball in spring training and pulls the shoulder out again, and this time even worse than before. So in 1952, Bill Veeck pays for him to have a very experimental surgery at Johns Hopkins University here in Baltimore, and by a very famous orthopedic physician. I'll get his name in just a second. And it works, but marginally. And Dr. George Bennett, put in a letter that he would never be able to throw properly again. Not be able to, he could throw, but he could never throw overhand again. Because the surgery that they did was he drilled a hole through the head of the bone. And then they took his bicep tendon and they threaded it through the hole and tied it together like you're tying a knot in a shoestring, hoping that would hold the bone in place. And actually, I found out about the operation, and I talked about this operation to Michael Jacobs, Dr. Michael Jacobs, who's the orthopedic specialist for the Baltimore Orioles. And he said, basically what they did back in that time was that they took an abnormality and they tried to fix it with another abnormality, hoping that it would make it stay in place. And actually, it worked pretty well because by the time he really started feeling better, end of 53, 54, he started hitting again. And when he was traded to Washington in 54, then he started hitting home runs again. But, like Dr. Jacobs said, he was basically hitting home runs with one arm, with his front arm, which would be his left arm because he was a right-handed hitter. And, it wasn't until 56, 57 that the other shoulder really, really get better again, where he started hitting a lot of home runs. So, yeah, that was a very, very big thing. He lost a good 3.5 years, maybe 4 years, to that injury, which now could have been fixed, and he'd be fixed in 9 months. Now with the arthroscopic procedures that they do. So he got hurt really bad, and it really cut down on his production. If he had those 4 years back, positively he would have had Hall of Fame numbers. So that's just the beginning, and there's more to come.
And you know something? What a lot of people don't know, which I know because I read your book and I do the stats here, he was known as Mr. Clutch for his late inning heroics. He hit almost a quarter of his home runs in the eighth inning or later.
Eighth inning or later, but that obviously that was after he got the shoulder back again, and that started about 1956, and of course in 57 he had his really, really big year where he was home run and RBI and total bases champ. And that continued on all the way through that. The same thing happened when he was in Chicago. He was traded to Chicago in 1960. He pinch hits a grand slam home run in the ninth inning and wins ball games. And he did the same thing in Philadelphia, pinch hitting late inning heroics. And he was a real clutch home run hitter. The only guy in Major League Baseball to pinch hit grand slam home runs in both leagues with Chicago and Philadelphia.
And he hit 10 grand slams and 10 pinch hit home runs. And he's up there. You know, I think Lou Gehrig, I'm not mistaken if Alex Rodriguez broke it or not, holds the records for, I think, of 18 grand slam home runs.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, but Sievers was just as prolific. I'm going to divert your attention for a moment. Bob Wolf, he just passed on last year. How'd you get him to write the forward? He writes a great forward in the book.
I thank him so very, very much. What a kind man he was. Bob kept his ties in Washington, D.C., believe it or not. Phil Wood, who's the broadcaster for the Washington Nationals, he does the Nats Talk Live after all of the games, does a pre- and post-game show for the Nats there at the stadium. And he would stay in touch with Bob. And it was actually Phil who gave me Bob's phone number. I called the man up, and he was like my best friend. Oh, Paul, well, you're doing this book. Oh, Roy Sievers, I know so much, blah, blah, blah. And he just went on. And the stories were so fantastic. And, you know, went to his house, did a video interview with him. He was just so kind and so forthcoming, gave me everything that I needed, and fed me lunch after we were done. You know, it's just the way that he was. He was just a nice man, so filled with stories. I mean, you're talking about the guy. You know, he interviewed everybody from Babe Ruth to Ty Cobb, all the way up to Alex Rodriguez. You know, and all of the Yankees. He's a legend. He's a legend in New York, and you know that. Yeah,
I mean, I used to hear him on the Knicks and the Rangers games. Not only that about Bob Wolf, but you even mentioned in your book, and it's for me, I knew it already, he's the longest-running broadcaster.
He was the longest broadcaster, continuous broadcaster in radio history, and also one of only two people, he and Ernie Harwell, I believe, that are enshrined in both the Basketball and Baseball Hall of Fame for announcing, for broadcasting.
Yeah, and you know something? A lot of people don't know this either. He called Don Larsen's perfect World Series game
on the radio. He called the last 5 innings of Don Larsen's game on the radio, and he said it was one of the biggest thrills in his life.
Oh yeah, and you know what? A few years later, 2 years later after that, he called the championship game, which is considered one of the greatest games ever, between the New York Giants, and the Baltimore Colts.
Oh, he was a legend. I mean, the guy was there for history, and his book that he wrote was really, really wonderful. I don't know if you've read it. It's called "It's Not Who Wins or Loses, It's How You Sell the Beer." I don't know if it was that book, but filled with all kinds of stories about him. You know, coming off of an airplane and taking a cab right to the stadium with no prep and doing a college basketball game or something of that nature. He was just a consummate professional and such a very nice person. Really very, very nice. It's just a shame that he's gone. But God bless him. He was 95 years old.
96. He was born 1917. 98. No, actually 90. Yeah, he was 99 years old. Yep, he was.
99? Yep,
no, he was 99. He was born in the same year as my grandmother. He was born 3 years after my grandmother. He was born on November 29th, 1920, and he died July 15th, 2017, so he was 96. Now, November 29th is significant for me for 2 reasons. One, that's usually the week after Thanksgiving, I always say that, and George Harrison from the Beatles had died that day in 2000.
Oh, really? That's right. Mm.
Yeah, so when I saw these sets,
and his wife is even older.
Yeah, she was in her 100s.
She's close to 100 now. She was 97 at the time. So it's just they're just sweet and nice people. and he was so knowledgeable. He was so giving of his time. He wrote a wonderful foreword that was, in all honesty, and I told him, and he was very kind about it. He wrote the foreword. It was 9 pages long, and there was an awful lot about him. And I wrote him back, and I said, I really love the foreword, but I'm going to have to edit a lot of this stuff out. It's too much about you and not about Roy. He said, I felt that when I was writing it, and please take out whatever you want. I'm not offended in any way at all. And he was very, very kind. And so I pared it down, a whole lot to focus on, his interactions with Roy. He did a video. I don't know if you can get it commercially, but he did a video compilation of a lot of his interviews. And in that interview, he has an interview with Ty Cobb and he has an interview with Babe Ruth. And in that video, he's got an interview with Roy and then an interview with Pete Runnels. And Pete Runnels does comment while Roy goes into the batting cages and swings in the batting cage. And it's a fantastic video because you really get to see Roy swinging. And it's really up close. It's right in the batting cages. And let me tell you, he was quick through the zone. He was quick through the zone. His hands were so fast.
Yeah,
it was much different than Calavito, much different than Mantle. If you looked at Mantle swinging, he punished the ball. I mean, he bulged and he really, really used a lot of leg drive and butt drive, and he really, really had a lot of torque. With Roy, he was a wrist hitter, really, really fast, like a whip, bang, just like Bob Wolf said, like Joe Lewis's, left jab, bang. It came out so fast you didn't know it was in your face, and it was just so fast that you didn't have time to react to it. And the same thing with his hands. He waited a long, long time for the ball, and then really got through the zone real fast. Fast hitter.
And he grew up in St. Louis, a couple of blocks away from Sportsman Park. Where in those days, you had 2 teams, so you had both the Cardinals and the Browns playing there. Mm-hmm. And not only that, for a baseball story, but his father played as well. Walter Skinny Sievers played Sandlot baseball. Now, let me ask you, his mother was of German descent. Was Walter born in St. Louis back in 1892?
Yes.
So he's American. Because what I was going to say is, like the Maggio's parents and like a lot of these guys, they came from Europe, and so you know how it is. You work in a factory, you slave for your children, but they didn't believe baseball was much of a sport. But in Sievers' case, he was the youngest, Roy, of, I believe, 4, and his father played. So let's talk about his upbringing in St. Louis.
Oh, it was, Roy always said, and I interviewed his brother Bill, who is still alive, and his brother Bill is 95. God bless him, and they've extended an invitation for me to come out to visit, which I'm going to try and do this year. They played ball every day, and a lot of the times they played with their dad. When Walter came home from work, he would take the kids out in the alleyway, and they would play cork ball. That's what they call it in St. Louis. Cork ball. It was not like what you grew up with in Brooklyn, which was stick ball, which you used with a bouncy spleen ball and a stick. This was like a cork-centered ball that was wrapped with like tape or a sock or something of that nature, kind of a spongy affair. And it was different from stick ball. You could play it on the side of the house. You could play it out in the yard, if there was a yard somewhere or in a vacant field or whatever. But it was a hitting game in that there wasn't base runners. Somebody kept track, on a piece of paper about you hit the ball. If you got the ball past a certain guy, you got a double. So you got a man on second. And so then the next guy comes up and he hits the ball and the guy goes to third and that kind of thing. So you kept track, but you didn't run bases. It was more of a hitting game. And so they played that every day. And of course, it was, Roy's dad, Walter, which instilled the love for the game because he had a tryout with the 1917 Detroit Tigers. But his Walter's father, Roy's grandfather, wouldn't let him go play ball. He said, he had to make money in St. Louis, bring the money home to the family. You know what it's like, because you told me all about the Italian side of your family, your wife's side of the family. You didn't go anywhere. Everybody in the family went. They made money. They brought the money back home to the padrone, and he took the money and says, "Okay, you get your $5. You get your $5. I take this money and all kind of stuff, and you contributed to the family." The same thing happened in the German side in St. Louis. The same thing happened. Everybody brought money home to Dad. Dad took care of doling it out and paid all the bills and stuff like that, and that's where you lived and that's where you made your money until you were old enough to make your own money, and then you left home and you made your own money. And so Roy's father, Walter, had to stay in St. Louis, make money for the family. And, and he had 4 kids to take care of at the time. But they loved playing ball all the time. And I think we may have touched on this before, but there are a lot of people in a lot of baseball books that I have been reading that all attest to the same thing. Between 1900 and today, the only thing the kids did was play baseball. And if you didn't have anything, you made it up. You used a tree branch. You used a broomstick. You hit bottle caps. You hit rocks. If you were lucky enough to have a ball, you hit that. And you kept hitting it until it completely destroyed yourself. But kids taught themselves how to hit and play ball in a natural manner. Now you've got schools. There are camps all over the place where they've got past Major League Baseball players that are now batting instructors, and they teach these kids in a real scientific way about hand-eye coordination. Back then, like Willie Mays was hitting rocks with a bent tree limb. So try doing that in today's era. Hit a rock with a bent tree limb, trying to make contact to make it hit it out of the yard. And so you learn all different kinds of things with your hands and with your eye and the coordination, and it's now all taught in a school. Back then, it was all done in the sandlot, and that's what Roy did. Roy played ball every single day as much as he could. Whitey Herzog said the same thing in his book. He played ball for sometimes like 90, 100 innings of baseball on a Saturday. They'd get out at 8 o'clock. They wouldn't come home until 9 o'clock when the sun went down. They just played baseball all day long. That's all they did. It was a great training ground for kids. Kept them out of trouble, and they learned the game on their own. Then when they would go into the minor leagues or when they would go to high school, usually when you go to high school, you got a coach of some kind. And then the coach kind of starts to clean you up. But basically, if you're a natural hitter, you're going to be a natural hitter. And Roy was a natural hitter. And and in St. Louis, which was a crazy, crazy baseball town, like you said, had 2 teams, you could see a game every single day. Somebody was home all the time. And for 25 cents, you get into the bleachers, and boom, you're there. So it was a great way to live. Can't do that now. It's a shame you couldn't do that. You could do it when I was growing up in the 50s. You actually still could get 50-cent bleacher seats in Griffith Stadium. And they let the kids go in there. And a lot of times the kids would sneak in, and they wouldn't say anything about them and the whole thing. And it was much easier to go to a baseball game. Now it's really difficult, and it's expensive.
And you know something, one of my kids plays Little League ball, and we had to get a specifically designed bat for and specifically, this is how bad it is. I just paid $89 for an aluminum bat. In my day, it was like $5.
Yes, I know. I'm there with you. I feel your pain. I feel your pain. Know what it's like. And the T-ball is even worse. With the little kids, they got to have a soft bat with a soft ball so nobody gets injured, and the heads and the whole thing. They're really very hardcore about safety and all that kind of stuff. So my big thing about Roy Sievers is that I don't know if I touched on this the last time that we talked, but I'd like to go over it again with you if you don't mind. Roy Sievers deserves to be in the Washington Nationals Ring of Honor. He really deserves to be in the Ring of Honor. If Frank Howard, who just got put in last year, is in the Ring of Honor, then Roy Sievers needs to be there, because without Roy Sievers, there would not have been a Frank Howard or an expansion Washington Senators. If you want me to tell you why, I will.
Yes.
In 1956, Calvin Griffith wanted to leave Washington, D.C. really bad. This was, of course, the year that you lost the Dodgers and the Giants in New York because they got wooed out to San Francisco and L.A., and the same people were trying to woo the Washington Senators out of Washington. Not only that, there was a group in Texas and a group in Minneapolis that were talking with Calvin Griffith. And Griffith was entertaining offers big time. But two things stopped him from moving in 56. Roy Sievers, who was putting butts in the seats, and Gabriel Murphy. Gabriel Murphy was the major minority stockholder, and he was the team treasurer. And he and Griffith started a feud in 56 because he wanted to leave. And Murphy said, no, don't move the Senators out of Washington. You'll leave the team void. And they started going after it, and Murphy threatened a lawsuit in D.C. court to keep Griffith in the stadium. And Griffith relented in 1956, but he started the feud with Murphy. And Roy Sievers had a great year in 56, hitting 59 home runs and 100 RBI. And then in 57, of course, was his great year with 42 home runs and 114 RBI and a ton of total bases. He led the league in total bases as well, 331 total bases. So between 1954, when Roy Sievers came, and 1959, when he left, Roy increased attendance by over 40%. And these are numbers that you can find at Baseball Reference. You can go to the Washington Senators site and you can look at all this stuff. I did all of the numbers. He increased attendance for the years that he was there because he was the only reason to come to Griffith Stadium to see him hit home runs. Jim Lemon came in 56. He started hitting home runs. In 59, they had Allison and Killebrew. They were hitting home runs all over the place. And so he was bringing people in there. And Griffith, being as parsimonious as he was, he couldn't lose his cash cow. And he wouldn't trade Sievers because Sievers was bringing in the money. And he was making popcorn and hot dog money. And believe it or not, the Washington Senators, on a last-place, seventh-place team, was still in the black. He was still making money, basically because he wasn't paying them anything and he wasn't getting any talent anyplace else. He had second-rate players, and the only star that he had was Roy Sievers. He was the only star. Camilo Pascual and Pedro Ramos were the only pitchers that they had. Other than that, they were journeyman players to a certain extent. Ed Yost was there for a long time. He was a great hitter and the whole thing, but he eventually got older and he got traded away. So without Roy Sievers being on the Senators from 54 to 59, my contention is that Griffith would have moved that team to Minnesota before the expansion in 1960. 61 was the first season, but they voted on it in the winter of 1960, and they voted to expand. That's when the Washington Senators first moved. The original Senators became the Minnesota Twins. The second Senators stayed here from 1961 to 1971. Then they left and became the Texas Rangers. My contention is if Roy hadn't been here putting butts in the seats, he would have moved the team in 56 or 57. There would have been no baseball in Washington. Even if they expanded the league in 1961, Washington may not have gotten another baseball team then, and there wouldn't have been any baseball in this town. So that's my contention, that Roy Sievers really saved that franchise. And he really picked up. It was like the spirited club. They were losers. It was just like being in St. Louis Browns. They were losers. They didn't have the hitting. They didn't have the pitching. And nobody came to the games, except when Roy started to hit home runs. And then people came to the games. And he saved that franchise. He kept the franchise going until 1971. They lost that team. They didn't get another team until 2005. So baseball would have been bereft here in Washington had it not been for Roy Sievers. There would not have been the Washington Nationals that there is today. That's my bone of contention. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So
let me ask you this. Why is it then that Roy Sievers is so overlooked, even by the Washington Senators?
you know who Bill James is. He's the grandfather of sabermetrics. And,
yeah, I know.
And in his book, The Baseball Abstract, he's got the 10 underrating system of where he puts its different values on why someone is overrated or underrated. And Roy fits like into 7 out of 10 of the different categories. Number one, a player who gets hurt for a long period of time gets undervalued even if he comes back and has a great year. Number two, and this is the biggest thing, and everyone is saying this in every book and on every radio show that I've been listening to, players in small market teams are underrated and undervalued. Everyone says if Roy Sievers had played in Boston, Detroit, or New York for his career, he would be in the Hall of Fame. He would have hit more home runs because he would have seen more pitches, batting behind or in front of Mickey Mantle. Okay, he would have seen better pitches, and he'd have Hall of Fame numbers, no question about it. If he had stayed in St. Louis and stayed with the St. Louis Cardinals, he would have had to fight his way through the farm system, but he would have been with better players, and his chances of getting into the Hall of Fame would have been a lot better. Players who have a major position change, which happened to Roy. Roy was ostensibly a left fielder most of his career. He was changed to a third baseman in St. Louis. He hurt the arm really bad. Then he was changed to a first baseman, and he played both first base and the outfield for the Senators, but mostly he played first base. So when you go from one position to another, you're always underrated and undervalued. And there's a whole system of why he is. If you read that the entire thing, I don't know if you want me to go into it here, but if you read the whole thing that Bill James says, he's tremendously undervalued, and mostly due to the fact that he played on losing teams, and no one gives him the second look. And my contention is 4 years, the 3.5 years that he wasn't injured, he comes back, he hits between 20 and 30 home runs every year. Another 50 RBI. He's got Hall of Fame numbers. Instead of hitting 318 home runs, he most likely would have hit 450 home runs and would have had a higher batting average as well. He could have been a 300 hitter. I mean, when you look at it, he's a 267 hitter for his lifetime, which ain't chopped liver. Okay? Basically, he was like a 295 hitter most of his career. And, of course, as he got older and as he got hurt in Philadelphia really bad and in Washington, his numbers dropped and his batting average dropped because he was used as a platoon player. He wasn't a first-line player after 1962. Once he went to the Phillies, he became 1964, he became a platoon player. So, you take all of those years away, he becomes a Hall of Famer. There's just no question about it. And the other factor, and this is my biggest contention, he was a nice guy. And unfortunately, the DeRocher quote, the nice guys finish last. Okay? I don't know if you know what's going on with Joe Pepitone, but there's actually talk about doing a movie about Pepitone's life. Why? Because he snorted and made love to all of New York City when he was there. And he had this offbeat life, and he was the bad boy, and he was drinking and drugs and women and the whole thing, and it makes for great TV, makes for great movies. Roy Sievers was nothing of that. He was a quiet, Midwestern man who never spoke ill about anybody, a family man, took care of his wife and children, went home in the off-season, didn't fool around, didn't drink. I had to have beer. I mean, Roy said, he had a beer or a cocktail every once in a while, but, you're not talking about going out and getting plastered every night like Mantle and Martin and Whitey Ford, and that kind of stuff. And, that doesn't make for big headlines. He wasn't a headline-grabbing guy. He stayed in the back, and he just did his job. He was a humble Midwestern guy, and that's, unfortunately to his detriment, So,
and,
that's part of the other reason why he's overlooked, because he didn't draw attention to himself.
Roy Sievers, Kenny Williams, he played on the St. Louis Browns. He beat Babe Ruth one year in home runs only because the Babe was suspended for barnstorming.
Yeah.
But when you look at his numbers, they should get him into the Hall of Fame. Roy Sievers, what do you call it? Veda Pinson. I mean, I see his son all the time on Facebook screaming. Hey, 283 average, but the biggest, out of all of them, and did play in a big market team. And I speak to, his daughter and his son is Gil Hodges.
I'm telling you that I firmly believe, and this is just a feeling in my soul, but I've been watching it. The Golden Age Committee, I believe, is sitting this year. I believe when I talked to Tim Kirchin from ESPN, I think he's also going to be on the Golden Age Committee, and I believe that they're sitting this year. And I think there's a lot of brouhaha about getting Gil Hodges into the Hall of Fame in the Golden Age era. That's what they're calling the in 1959. I think it's 1959, 1969.
Yeah.
They're calling that the Golden Age between 1940 and 1969. I'd have to check the parameters on the Hall of Fame website. But there's a lot of talk about doing that. And there's no question about the fact that the man, Gil Hodges, devoted his life to baseball. And he was on pennant-winning teams, and he managed pennant-winning teams, and he took the haphazard Washington Senators in the middle of their season and turned them around to winners. And then he went to the Mets and turned them around to winners. Okay? So, yeah. And there are so many hitters, people like that in the 1950s baseball, like you say, Veda Pinson, Vic Wertz, Johnny Callison, Mickey Lolich, Ted Kluszewski, Joe Adcock, Roy Sievers, so many other guys that were devastating, fearful hitters, okay? But what's the criteria? 3,000 hits and 500 home runs. Okay? Jim Thome walked in there, he got 618 home runs. Of course, he's walking into the Hall of Fame now. But that seems to be the criteria if you don't get 500 home runs. Well, there are so many people that hit over 300 home runs now, and they're ignored. And do you know how hard it is to hit a home run in Major League Baseball? That ain't chopped liver. So so many of those guys are overlooked. Joe Adcock actually had a better career when he was with the Braves than Hank Aaron did. He hit more home runs per game than Aaron. And, Aaron never hit 50 home runs in a year. Did you know that?
Yeah, he hit 48, I think, was his most.
Was his most. Okay, but he was just a consistent 30, 40 home runs every year. 100 RBI every year. He was consistent, and it grew to over 700 home runs. So, but look at all those other players that are as overlooked as Roy Sievers, and Gil Hodges is one of the biggest ones, one of the biggest. So I'm in your camp. I'll be a Dodger fan for that. Okay.
Well, you know what the thing that bothers me is that you have people sitting on the committee in the Hall of Fame, and I like to bash the Hall of Fame because they are using sabermetrics. They want the WAR percentage. They want this percentage. They didn't have these percentages when Roy Sievers played.
No.
They didn't. And so you literally have to take a snapshot at the time that these players retired. Gil Hodges, I know, was fifth. In batting, him and Duke Snider had the most home runs combinations in the National League in the 1950s before his powers were going down, and then he was traded to the Mets. Actually, Washington. But did he go to Washington, Gil Hodges, and then to the Mets? I forget. And then he won the World Series. He dropped dead on April 2nd, 1972, and if you know your history, Marvin Miller called the first players' strike. And so he was golfing on a golf course, getting ready to have Easter dinner with his family, and he dropped dead at the age of 47, Gil Hodges. And he's not in the Hall of Fame because of it.
Yeah. If he had stayed longer, his career, his legacy and legend would be enough to get him there. And I bet you had the amount of money, and had he not been a heavy smoker, and had he lived, he probably would have gone to the broadcast booth, and he would have gotten, a lot of recognition like that. A lot of people complain about that a lot of these guys who had good careers, and we'll make it, put good in capital letters, like Richie Ashburn, gets into the Hall of Fame, but more from the fact that he broadcast for the Phillies for how many years, and you get that camaraderie with the writers, with the broadcasters, and all of a sudden Richie, what a good guy. No question about the fact that he was a spark plug for the Whiz Kids in 1950. He was a fantastic hitter. But let's go back and look at the career averages. Is it enough for a Hall of Fame consideration? And if it's enough for Hall of Fame consideration for him, let's go back and look at Roy Sievers, Vic Wertz, all these kind of people, Boog Powell, Rocky Calavito. Why not Rocky Calavito? Okay?
That's right. And what's interesting, Rocky's still alive, I believe.
Yes, Rocky Calavito's still alive. I did a show with him, an autograph show many, many years ago. He only played for 14 years, unfortunately, but still 370, what was it? 374 home runs, okay? Yeah. That's not chopped liver for 14 years, okay?
No, I think he has diabetes like I do, and I think one author I know is doing his biography. I forget. I can't believe I get so many people on my show. I forget who's who. He's doing. He spends his time with Rocky Calavito, and he's almost blind, Calavito, due to diabetes. And they just cut his leg off, I think. And,
no.
Yeah, they just cut his leg off. He has diabetes like I do. And, for me, I almost got my leg cut off 2 years ago because my foot turned black. They did bunionectomy. And I caught an infection in my bone, and thank God they were able to save my leg. It dropped dead on the table for about 2 minutes. They revived me. But I understand that, when you have a degenerative disease, and the Italians, the Jews, the American Indians, it's very prevalent, and especially African-American with diabetes runs in my family. So I think Rocky is at that point now where he's still alive, and he got all his marbles together, but he's sick. I know that.
Here's the perfect example. Sievers, in 17 seasons, 318 home runs. Why? 3.5 years he lost to injury in 51, 52, 53. Okay? And so take those 3 back, and Calavito, 14 years, 374 home runs. That's 14 productive years that he had straight before he retires. So bring back those 3 years that Roy didn't have, he's got 400 home runs. I'm positive of it. And he's got more consideration. I'm just positive, the whole purpose of the book, Ian, was that he was my hero, and I love the guy. And when you're 10, 11 years old, you transfer these first emotions that you get as a kid onto your sports hero, or to the hockey player hero, the basketball hero. You find a sports hero predominantly because they're on TV or radio, and they become, you learn frustration. You learn, Roy strikes out, and you feel like you struck out, and that you didn't do well, or something like that. And then he hits a home run, and you're all elated, and you feel this euphoria, when you're a little kid, and it's really almost like a first love, like your first kiss, something like that. It's very, very much like that. It's this kind of emotional awakening in a young boy. And I cannot begin to tell you how many people that I've met at different Sabre meetings, doing some things with the book and stuff of this nature, how many people said exactly the same thing to me. Roy Sievers was my hero when I was growing up. Oh my God, I couldn't remember this. My dad took me to a game. He hit a home run, It just seems like everybody that I talked to, their dad took it to a game and Roy hit a home run. It just seemed to be that way. And it's this elation. It's all over. It doesn't matter where you go. I'm sure you've got the same story. I'm sure that you've talked to hundreds of people on your radio show that have said the same thing. Oh, my favorite player was Johnny Callison with the Phillies. Oh, my God, what a hitter he was. And they remember this time in their life. And so I wanted to bring this back a little bit for me, but also for all of the people that I had talked to who had this love and adoration for him. It's just an amazing thing. And I think there's a lot of other old ball players out there that deserve the same kind of recognition. Certainly Boog Powell, but Boog Powell has had a great career outside of baseball, selling barbecue at the stadium, and everybody still loves Boog because you can see him every day and he signs in the shower. And he's a lovely guy. He's a wonderful, wonderful guy with lots of stories, and he likes to go fishing on his boat and the whole thing. And the people in Baltimore, they just love him. So he becomes even more of a figure as you grow up. I mean, Boog was as tremendous a hitter as Roy Sievers was. And can you imagine if Roy Sievers had gone to the Baltimore Orioles in 1954 like he was supposed to do when they sold the Browns in 54? Can you imagine Roy in 1959 with him and a young Boog Powell coming up and hitting home runs in 59, 60, 61? It would have been unbelievable. It would have been just plain unbelievable. Those two guys on that team. And Roy would have hit so many more home runs in Memorial Stadium because they had a shorter left field porch than Griffith Stadium, which was 388.
Yeah, and we can't forget about Brooks Robinson. And then in 66
comes Frank Robinson.
And guess what? They win the World Series in 66.
Oh my God! I don't know if Roy would have been on the team by 66. He was old by then. In 66, he would have been 40 by then, so he probably wouldn't have been playing by that long. But you never know. Maybe he would have hurt himself so much. But that's just the way it goes.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, I just checked my records here. It was in 2015. They interviewed Rocky Calavino, and they had to take the leg off, but he still had the knees. He's like, I'm so grateful for that. I have no infections. Good for him, because I had an infection. Let me tell you, I was in an IV for 5 months afterwards.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. Last year was pretty bad. I had to put my show on hiatus, and my wife I was peeing in a one of those portable bottles. Oh, it's terrible. I have diabetes, and my sugar's under control. But just to be there and to see them just carve my foot like the trenches in France, that's exactly what it looked like, to put hardware in. But, he said, I don't want anyone's pity. So I know Rocky has type 2 diabetes. He's been fighting for a while. Now, let me ask you this important question, because we're going to have to get you back on the show, because like I said, and I always tell people who are on my show, I just can't do this show in one take or two takes. Roy Sievers really needs to be digested. But I want to ask you this question, because I've helped out Jenny Paul, who is Gabe Paul's daughter. And, of course, Gabe, for people who don't know, he built the Yankee teams of the 1970s. That's Steinbrenner. He brought Cincinnati to prominence. The 61 Reds were his design as general manager and president of the Reds. He was in Cleveland for a while. He spent 60 years in baseball. And I wrote a petition, a brief, to the Cincinnati Hall of Fame to allow Gabe Paul to be inducted. And it's coming up again this year. My brief is going to become going to the Veterans Committee. What could we do to for Roy Sievers to Washington? Do you know anyone on the committee there?
I started a petition at gopetitions.com, and I need to really start pushing this a little bit more. But I'm hoping that people who will listen to this show and are interested will go to it. It's called gopetitions.com, and you type in Roy Sievers, and I've got a thing there that says Roy Sievers into the Nationals Ring of Honor, and you can actually vote for him. That's number one. Number two, I got very, very lucky last week, and I was invited to another podcast here in Washington, D.C., and it's called Our Town. It's the broadcaster is Andy Ockershausen, who was the managing director of WMAL Radio. WMAL Radio is one of the biggest radio stations it had always been from Washington, D.C., and they broadcasted, basically they were the Washington Redskins station for almost 30 years before they lost the contract, and they were bought up by Mickey Mouse, and they changed the format, so they don't do the Redskins anymore. But Andy brought me on the show, and Andy is on that committee at Nats Park. And he has said to me that he's going to start talking to the people in the Nationals. He knows the learners who are the owners of the team. And I'm hoping, I'm crossing fingers and legs and toes, that, he'll give me an entree so that I can go and talk to somebody at the top. If I can get to one of the learners and talk to them, if I can talk to Rizzo and just convince them of the importance of Roy Sievers, we can get him into the Ring of Honor. He is in the D.C. Baseball Hall of Fame, along with Mickey Vernon, along with Frank Howard. There's a lot, but it's not the same thing as the Ring of Honor at Nats Park, because at all of the stadiums, especially Yankee Stadium, they got everybody's number all the way around the whole stadium, and you're in the Ring of Honor, and you're memorialized for the rest of your life. I think he deserves to be there. So, if there's anyone out there in the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network who hears this particular interview, please get in touch with me. I'm on Facebook, and tell me who you know and what we can do to try and get him into the Hall of Fame. I mean, here in Washington, he deserves recognition by the Washington Nationals. I think it's ludicrous that they're putting, all of these guys who played for Montreal, like, Tim Raines and Pudge Rodriguez, who spent 2 years with the Washington Nationals, and now he's in the Ring of Honor because he got into the Hall of Fame. Well, big deal. He was a Texas Ranger for all his career. Same thing with Tim Raines. He was a Montreal Expo for all his career. What he has to do with the Washington Nationals, I don't know. Roy Sievers has to do with the Washington Nationals. He has to do with Washington baseball. He was the hero of Washington baseball, and he kept baseball in Washington for a long, long time. So that's my soapbox.
Well, Tim Raines, of course, the Expos moved to the Nationals back in 2004. But this is what I want you to do, and this is how I'm going to close the show because we're going to get you back. We need to talk more about Roy and what he's done. I didn't even scratch the surface of Roy. That's what a tremendous story this is, and I love stories like this, and your book is fantastic. I implore everybody to go out and buy it. Again, Bob Wolf did the forward. We can find it at Amazon. How about yourself? Where can we find it on your website?
Amazon is the place to go. Barnes & Nobles, you can go there. You can go to Goodreads. You can go to McFarland, which is the home company, and they do sales right there. So you can go to McFarland, and they'll send it to you right there. And there's also another place called the Book Depository, which is an international site. And the lovely people at McFarland have put me on that site as well. So best off that you go to those sites and order it straight for you, or you can contact me on Facebook and make arrangements through personal messaging, and I'll send you the book myself and autograph it if you want.
But I was going to say, let's market this a little bit better. Let's autograph it. You get a copy, and we'll go from there. But this is what I wanted to tell you. I want you to tell Andy about me. Tell him I'm a lawyer by trade. Tell him if he needs anything regarding Roy Sievers, I will talk with you, and I will write a brief advocating for Roy Sievers to be in the Ring of Honor. Yep.
That's the Ring of Honor. I'm happy to go with that.
I will write a brief, and I will stick out all the points and his averages and his home runs. Casey Stengel will put every positive life into the brief, and we'll try to get him in for Washington because I think it's a good cause.
I thank you. I appreciate that very, very much. And a lot of people that I've talked to have said the same thing. I did a show in February it's called the Washington D.C. Baseball History Convention, and it was very nicely done. And I talked about it, and a lot of people have given me positive feedback. So there are other like-minded souls out there that want to do the same thing. So let's get him in the Ring of Honor. What do you say?
Yeah, and you know what? If they just don't want to go by my brief and they need an oral argument in front of the committee, I'd be more than happy to go down to Washington, just like I'm more than happy to go to Cincinnati and argue in front of the Veterans Committee if it needs to be, because I could show diagrams, I could have you as a witness, and we could conduct our own trial for Roy Sievers. Hold the line, Paul. We're going to get you back. Let me end the show, and I'll talk to you for about a minute afterwards. Folks, very powerful show. You know, Paul is great. You know, there's never a dull moment with Paul. He tells it like it is. And, you know, he's a paisan. What are you going to do, you know?
You're going to do.
That's how the paisans are. They yell at you, they scream at you, they tell it to your face, but at the end of the day, I'm getting my bowl of macaroni or my bowl of gnocchis with the fresh sauce that you don't have to buy in the store because it comes from my in-laws' garden, and I help. Not only do I help pick it in the hot heat, but I help crush it, and then we set it to fire to seal the jars for the winter. But that's the paisanis, and I'm part Italian, you know, I'm in the family. But it's very good to have Paul on this show. Thank you, sir. And, of course, thanks to Ralph Tycho, Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ian Kahanowitz. We'll see you next time. Baseball's in another week. And this is how I end the show, as all of you know. In the immortal words of one of my heroes, who I did not get to see because he died 5 years before I was born, Edward R. Murrow, good night, folks. Good luck. We'll see you next time.